Today we're going to talk about the history of sexpionage, and this is going to be our outline as it goes. First, we need to talk about social engineering and what social engineering actually is, because that will help us understand what espionage is, and ultimately that'll help us understand what sexpionage is. Then we're going to talk about a femme fatale, which is essentially the title that's been given to the operatives. And then we're going to go into the history of sexpionage, and we're going to spend most of our time here with the various campaigns and the various marks and the various operatives, so on and so forth. Then we're going to talk about what makes a perfect mark, what makes a perfect target in this particular world. And finally, my personal story, because I was once a mark. I was actually a victim of a long con, and I'm not going to give too many of the details away, but that was actually the reason, that was the trigger, the anchor, why I became Hank Hackerson, and I got into cybersecurity and hacking and all that different stuff. So this is the outline of our video today. Okay, so let's talk about social engineering. What is social engineering? And in the context of information security, the use of deception to manipulate individuals into divulging confidential or personal information that may be used for fraudulent purposes. Now, this actually can work in the digital realm, meaning social engineering can be done on Instagram, it can be done on your email, and a variety of different digital platforms. But for the purpose of this video, we're going to talk about what happens in the physical world, in the actual real world, and the various espionage campaigns that involved social engineering. Because essentially, what social engineering is that you're manipulating an individual into doing what you want them to do. And you can do that in a lot of different ways, but for the purpose of this video, we're going to be talking about specifically espionage, which is spycraft and the world of spycraft, and then how sex was used to social engineer somebody, to actually manipulate somebody into getting what they wanted out of them. Sex, yeah, what is sex? If you don't know what sex is, then I really don't know how to help you. That's a completely different video, so we're gonna skip this particular question. Hopefully you know what sex is. What is espionage? So espionage is the practice of spying or using spies, typically by governments, to obtain political and military information. And they refer to this typically as spycraft. So espionage itself is the essentially using spies to do whatever you want for your government, and there's corporate spies, and there's a lot of different types of spies, and essentially somebody's girlfriend could be a spy. You know, the stalking that happens on social media is a version of spying. Some women make really good spies just naturally because they know how to dig for information and they know how to get what they want. So espionage specifically is an actual practice that's done by governments typically to get information that they need for political campaigns from politics or politicians, and even military infrastructure and military campaigns and information. Then we finally have what is sexpionage, which is the involvement of sexual activity, if it's not obvious, right? So the involvement of sexual activity, or the possibility of sexual activity, because you don't necessarily even have to get sexual with somebody to make them think that you want to, right? That's how kind of where the spycraft part of it comes in. That's where the manipulation part of it comes in. So the possibility of sexual activity, intimacy, romance, or seduction to conduct espionage. Sex, or the possibility of sex, can function as a distraction. It can be an incentive, cover story, or unintended. And that part was actually very interesting as I was reading through some of these campaigns. It could be an unintended part of the intelligence operation because, you know, they didn't mean for it to happen, but it ended up happening because if it didn't happen, it would blow their cover. Or if it didn't happen, they wouldn't be able to get what they needed from their mark. So that part was very interesting as well. So let's jump into a femme fatale. You know, no pun intended. We don't want to jump into any femme fatales, but we want to talk about what a femme fatale is. So There's a lot of different words for this. There's a lot of movies made about this. There's a lot of songs and books written, and there's this particular topic has actually been one that is of big interest for creatives and just the world at large, right? Because a female that gets what she wants from a man is not a new concept. This has been going on for hundreds, if not thousands of years, probably since the beginning of time. So it's also known, or they are also known as man-eaters. The Mata Hari, which is the title that has been taken from one particular person, but that ended up being another one of these monikers. And a vamp or a vampire, that they literally they suck the blood out of you, right? So this particular entity is a mysterious, beautiful, and seductive woman whose charms ensnare her lovers, often leading them into compromising, deadly traps. So this is that's where the word fatale comes in, right? So a fatal woman, essentially, that's what that means. I believe it's a French term. So it's a fatal woman is what that is. A fatal female. All right, so now that we've gotten some of these definitions out of the way, let's actually jump into the history of sexpionage. The Soviet Union has been a very interesting entity in a lot of the research that I did. They seem to be responsible for a lot of this stuff, at least as far as the research that I found, because by the nature of this topic, espionage being spycraft, sexpionage being just is kind of a subcategory of spycraft, a lot of this information doesn't make it to the public eye. A lot of this information that made it to the public eye only did so because somebody was their identity was revealed, or they were made, quote unquote, and that story was released to the public as a result. But a lot of these things don't actually make it. And so based on what I have found, the Soviet Union was like a very strong entity or a strong country when it came down to this particular version of spycraft. This particular gentleman is named Yakov Agranov, and he was responsible for sex spy operations among the creative class intelligentsia. I don't know if I pronounced that right or if I spelled that right. I think I did. But so the creative class intelligentsia is essentially the group of super creatives or creative professionals that were considered as the key driving force for economic development of post-industrial cities. So this is around, I want to say maybe like the 1930s. Late 1920s, early 1930s is when this concept or this specific campaign with Yakov really launched. And the super creative core or the creative professionals, as you can kind of tell from the image here, you have, musicians, you have engineers, you have dancers, you have actors, actresses, and really inventors and people that are in the world of economic development or engineering all fall under the creative class. And these are the people that developed most of the economy or were a big driving force of the economy in the United States post the Industrial Revolution, because they were creating things. And so the creative class was the main target of Yakov. Right, it was his main intention to target those particular people, and so the person that he partnered up with was this guy. I'm gonna butcher his name, but I'm gonna say Vyacheslav Menjinsky is the partner of Yakov Agranov. And Vyacheslav Menjinsky, I'm just going to call him Menjinsky. Menjinsky did a lot of things. If you look him up on Wikipedia or Google or anything like that, he's done a lot of stuff. He's had a very big history. But one of the things that he did through his partnership with Agranov was they started a school called the Lenin Technical School. And inside the Lenin Technical School, There were a lot of ballerinas, Bolshoi ballerinas, cinema and theater actresses, and a lot of beautiful women who served as the main weapons for a lot of these sexpionage campaigns. So essentially, they recruited these beautiful women from the ballerina world or the ballet world, the cinema and theater worlds, and they indoctrinated them into their campaigns for attacking the creative class of America. And this was one of the earliest campaigns that I was able to find, which kind of marks around the 1920s, 1930s areas, that I was actually able to attach faces to the people that were involved. Because again, a lot of these people or a lot of these campaigns, they're so vague that there's such little information that's been released about them that you can't really try to figure out who was involved and who they were targeting and how it all happened. So this was one of the earliest ones that I was about able to find around the Soviet Union era. And there's another particular school, I guess we can call it, which is the Kazan Tatarstan Sexpionage School, also known as the State School 4. And this is again in the Soviet Union era, and this is separate from these particular guys right here. So from Agranov and Minjinsky. This specific school was just one of those places that a lot of people were developed, and the school trained women to come out and be swallows, the bird, obviously not the sexual reference, but maybe the sexual reference, I don't really know, but I think they were referring to the birds, because essentially what happened from the story that came from that school was the book Red Sparrow, which eventually was turned into a film, and the person that was chosen to act as the lead spy or the main character was Jennifer Lawrence. So Jennifer Lawrence actually played in the film Red Sparrow, and she was the main person who, she was, as you can tell, she was a ballerina and she was a spy and so on and so forth. And it's gotten mixed reviews, but it's just the concept itself is interesting enough that if you're interested in espionage, and if you're interested in spycraft, and if you're a fan of beautiful women and all these type of things, it's worth it to watch. But yeah, this that specific school, so this school, the State School 4, because I'm really going to just butcher these names because they're really like foreign names to me. This specific school was responsible for the main character that came out and ended up being the main character in the story for Red Sparrow, which was played by Jennifer Lawrence. And now we can actually, that's like a nice segue for us to go into the notable femme fatales of history. So this is in no means meant to be the comprehensive list, because again, I wasn't able to find everybody's name that has been involved in the sexpionage campaigns across history, and the ones that I was able to find, some of them are faceless, so you get monikers, you get code names, you don't get the actual name of the person, therefore you can't find an actual picture of the person, so on and so forth. So some of these the ones that I was able to find that are of note are the ones that I was able to find pictures for, and I was able to find the actual story for, and therefore they made it to this particular video. Our first notable femme fatale is Kursk Nightingale, and this was her code name. Her real name is Nadezhda Plevitskaya. These names are just tough. She was an opera singer formerly, and she was very used to the expensive lifestyle, and she had a lust for money. And because of her lust for money, they were able to recruit her. And her main purpose was really just to go around and sing for, there is this group of Russian soldiers called the White Movement. And her main operative, or her main objective, there you go, her main objective was to gather intel from this particular group. And so she just, she did her job until she was eventually caught. And being that, they don't have a soft spot for spies, she was ordered to be killed. So she was ordered to, be executed by a firing squad. As she was standing there, she refused her blindfold, and she didn't want to be, blindfolded. And so what happened was there was a specific soldier, and this is how the story goes, right? So I don't know how much of this is true, but there's a soldier by the name of Nikolai Skoblen, who was riding along on his horse, and he notices that this woman who's said to be killed by the firing squad has refused, and she's refused her blindfold, and she's standing there bravely, and so he gets inspired by her, and so he orders the firing squad to stop and not kill her. He rescues her, he marries her, and they both defect, and they joined the Cheka and the Russian exile movement. And that's kind of the end of their story. I believe they moved to Paris or something like this after the fact. She was not ultimately murdered, and she's one of the ones that survived the stories, right? Survived the wrath that comes back against a spy that is caught ultimately. Our next notable femme fatale is going by the name of Cynthia. So this was her code name, and she was from Britain. And her real name is Amy Thorpe Pack, and she volunteered to become an MI6 agent while she was married. So the story goes that she was bored of her marriage, and because she was bored, she volunteered to go into MI6 because she was seeking excitement. And this is actually a very popular character. I had to condense a lot of her campaigns and a lot of her stories. Jennifer Lawrence was set to actually play her in her biopic as well. I'm not sure if they're actually going to make it or not, but the story goes that Jennifer Lawrence is supposed to play her, and she's referred to as like the Jane Bond, like the female Bond, because of just all the stuff that she did. And it's the interesting part of it is that she did it because she wanted excitement, not necessarily money, which is kind of interesting. So she was involved in a lot of operations. She was involved in various operations to help the Polish to gain intel about Hitler and Stalin. She was involved in operations to infiltrate the U.S. embassies, the Italian military, the OSS, which is a service of the United States, and a lot of just a lot more. There were so many other things. These were just the ones that were most notable, but she's done a lot of work as an operative. And as I mentioned earlier, it was a lust for danger and excitement that got her recruited ultimately. And the person, her handler, had an ex-girlfriend named Cynthia, I guess, and so he gave her the name Cynthia because she was just so passionate about the danger and the excitement of the spy world. And that's how she got her freaking name. So she did whatever it took to get the job done. And one of the stories that was mentioned was that in the middle of a cryptography mission where they were stealing some cryptographs from a safe in a museum, she had to distract a night guard. And so while her partners were taking pictures and getting the cryptograph information, she got naked to distract a suspicious guard during that operation. And honestly, when you look at the picture, I think she's actually beautiful. Some of the pictures that I saw, I was like, okay, I don't know if these women really should even qualify. And I'm sorry that I'm saying this, okay? Like, if you're a woman listening to this, don't get mad at me, but you would expect a honeypot to be a gorgeous honeypot. You would expect a femme fatale to be a gorgeous femme fatale. And that's I don't know, maybe because of the way that I've been conditioned from the movies that I saw or whatever it is, but that's kind of what I expected it to be. And I'll show you one that's more modern. It's a modern story. And when you see her, you'll be like, damn, this lady is gorgeous. So I believe this is the one, actually. This is Aliia Roza, and this is actually a modern story. She defected from Russia. She was part of the Russia spy military. She defected against Russia and lives in the United States. And you look at her and you're like, okay, she's pretty damn fine. At least in my opinion anyway, this lady is freaking gorgeous, and it makes sense for her to be a honeypot, like a spy, right? So her story essentially is that the guy that she was supposed to get intel from, her mark, she was playing the honeypot, but she fell in love with her target. She didn't complete her mission, and because she didn't, obviously, if you do something like that and you actually fall in love with your target, you would get blacklisted, and they want your head at that point. So they both escaped and they moved to the United States. And there's a lot of articles about her. So if you kind of look up her name, you'll be able to read her full story and her beliefs against Putin, and what's going on with her belief with the Ukraine and Russia war, and so on and so forth. So this is actually a relatively recent story that I was able to find about a honeypot, a spy, who actually worked in the Russian intelligence military, and she defected. She defected against Russia in the modern era, against Putin, because of her beliefs of Putin, and she now lives in the United States, apparently. Obviously, the information about her whereabouts are not disclosed for anonymity and for safety and things like that, but this was one of the more recent femme fatales that I was able to find. So, yeah, I look at that picture and I'm like, man, this is a beautiful woman right here. Totally makes sense that she would be a freaking honeypot spy. So, all right, and now we're going to move on to our notable marks, our notable targets. And the information about these people was even harder to find. And these are the notable ones that I was able to find pictures for, and I was able to find some kind of a decent story for, make it notable, exciting enough, or at least interesting enough to be included in this video. But you can you can Google so many different articles about sexpionage, and you'll be able to find a lot of stories about different people, but they're not very detailed and they're not super exciting. So I'm not promising that this is going to be super exciting either, but at the very least I was able to find pictures. Okay, this gentleman right here is Commander Anthony Courtney from the Soviet Union, and Commander Courtney denounced the government because he believed that the government at the time was too soft. And, it's interesting that somebody that's supposed to be that hardcore, that believes that the people that they represent are too soft, ends up getting caught in a freaking sexpionage campaign, and he ends up being a mark. It's very, very interesting when you try to kind of like analyze. The irony is it's very, very interesting. But so, there's a in tourist. I'm not exactly sure. I wonder if it was a misspelling that I found, but that's exactly how they spelled it. So he slept with his in tourist guide, or we can just call it a tourist guide. And the tourist guide is Zenaida Grigorievna. And of course, as he does it, pictures are taken. And so the pictures were at first held against him, and he tried to get the situation figured out, but they blackmailed him for it. And ultimately, a London journal from the United Kingdom. This is actually very interesting because there's another story that I found that also the United Kingdom ended up putting the person on blast. So it's like it all ended up, at the time at least, with the UK and Great Britain, so on and so forth. So a London journal published the pictures. They published the pictures. And in the very next election, he lost his seat. It's interesting that he was, at least the story doesn't say that he was killed or anything. Nothing else happened to him. It's just that they kind of leveraged him until they got whatever they wanted from him. And ultimately, it cost him his seat on the parliament. So this was our first mark. Our next mark is Maurice Dejean, a Frenchman, French military, or a French ambassador, I want to say. But he was also caught up by the Soviet Union. He had a weakness for women, wouldn't you know it? The KGB took advantage of this weakness, and they set him up with multiple honey traps. And he was married, of course, and throughout the various honey traps that he slept with and went through and all this different kind of stuff. One of them got him beat, meaning like he actually was beaten up, and it was by the guy that was the supposed husband of the honey trap. So they were both spies. They weren't actually married, but he's at the girl's house, the lady's house. The guy comes home, gets his butt beaten, and then from there they entrap him or they blackmail him, and then they leverage him for future use. And they kept doing this until they got whatever they wanted from him, and ultimately they kind of got rid of him. The story again doesn't say whether or not he was killed or anything like that, but they just continued to leverage him until they no longer needed him. And I'm gonna assume that means that they killed him. There was no illicit or explicit line that said that they killed him. I'm just gonna assume that that's what happened, because usually that's how it ends up in stories like this. So now we can talk about some of the honeypot operations that really truly do play like film. Some of these stories are pretty cool. They are pretty much as close to a movie about espionage as it can get, and they're real life stories. These are stories that actually happened. Our first one is Clayton Lonetree, and this is Clayton Lonetree. He was a Navajo Marine that worked at the U.S. Embassy in Russia. He had a drinking problem. He was lonely. He was very distanced from the rest of the Marines that was his peer group, and he didn't really have much of a life outside of his actual duties as a Marine. In 1985, he met and ultimately fell in love with Violeta Sena. And she returned his love essentially. Like after however long they were together, she actually when he announced his love for her, she ultimately did return the love, and she told him that he loved him as well. And because of that, they grew their relationship even further. And after several months, Sena introduced Lonetree to her uncle Sasha, who pretty much treated him the same way, gave Lonetree the same type of love and same type of attention that Sena had given him. And due to that, Lonetree also developed an affection for the Uncle Sasha. Sasha was really, really interested in Lonetree's work at the embassy. He was asking a lot of questions about his work and his duties and everything that went on over there. And eventually, Lonetree became suspicious, because he's like, okay, well, he's really asking a lot of questions about my work. And it turns out that Uncle Sasha was actually a KGB agent. And even though the records don't actually say that Violeta was also an agent, it's been assumed that she was also an agent, or at least involved in some capacity with the KGB. But at this point, by the time that Lonetree actually found out, he was way too far gone. He was in too deep. And he still kept supplying intel to Sasha and Violeta until he was ordered to return home and go back to the States. And at that point, he rejected the order to go back to the States, and he actually requested to be stationed in Vienna. So he essentially just said, I want to work at the embassy in Vienna now, and they approved it. And so while he was at the embassy in Vienna, he still continued to provide intelligence and blueprints to Sasha, and he sold them so that he could actually collect money and use that money to save up to marry Violeta in Moscow. Or at least this was kind of the plan that was provided to him. This was the promise that was made to him. And he gave up CIA agents in Austria and basically any other intel that Sasha wanted, in hopes that he would eventually end up reuniting with Violeta. And eventually, he couldn't take it because they weren't allowing him to actually do it. He still wasn't able to meet Violeta, and he still wasn't able to move to Moscow. And so by December of 1986, he finally confessed. He got drunk. Lonetree went and spoke with a CIA agent, and he essentially told them everything that he had done up until that point. He was immediately arrested, and he was tried for espionage. He served 9 years in a military prison and never saw Violetta ever again. And that is the story of Clayton Lonetree. Our next story is Irvin C. Scarbeck. And this is Scarbeck. This happened in Warsaw in 1959. Scarbeck was married at the time, 3 kids, and he was a foreign service officer. And he was serving at the U.S. State Department. He was 41 years old at the time. And he met a 22-year-old and had an affair with this young 22-year-old by the name of Ursula Maria Discher. And Discher was an orphan when she originally met Scarbeck. So they didn't meet and have sex immediately right away. Like, they met, and I think for the records, it was like they had known each other for 10 years. So Scarbeck met Discher when she was 12 and she was an orphan. And at first, he basically just financed a new life for her. He paid for new clothes and for food. And ultimately, when I think she was old enough, he paid for an apartment for her to move into. And then eventually, they slept with each other. Polish agents broke in and took photos of them being together. So this is where we'll end up seeing that this is kind of ends up being like a pretty common theme. That, whoever the mark is, they get caught up in this situation, and then there's whoever the authorities were or the people who set up the entire thing, the people that were pulling the strings, and end up taking pictures or getting some kind of footage and then using that as blackmail. So Polish agents in this instance, they break in, they take photos of these two sleeping together, and so they hold that against them, and they're like, hey, you either work for us or we're going to release all this stuff. And so he started working for them, and he gave the Polish agents intelligence. Never accepted any money for it, which was kind of an interesting thing, because it was assumed, or ultimately in the trial later on, they were trying to pull this card that he cared for her, and they were trying to gain sympathy from the whole thing. And because he didn't accept any money for it, I don't know if that makes it better or worse, honestly. But he even got Discher a passport to guarantee safe passage for her out of Poland and into West Germany. So he really genuinely cared for this girl. And when it was time for him to actually be tried, Discher came and testified as one of the witnesses on his behalf, like to help support him. But ultimately, Scarbeck was actually found guilty of espionage, and he was sentenced. And he was sentenced 3 consecutive 10-year sentences, which I think out of everything that I read for this was the worst one based on what I learned. And now we get to move on to Sharon Scranage. I'm probably mispronouncing that. Sharon Scranage was a CIA clerk that was stationed in Ghana in 1983. She met somebody by the name of Michael Susudis, who worked for Ghana intelligence. And Susudis was ordered to seduce Scranage and gather intel from her. So he was assigned specifically to seduce Scranage and gain intel from her. And he actually did it. She was, a lonely woman, didn't really have much going on for her. And so once he got the seduction going, he actually got Scranage to give up a lot of intelligence. The CIA agents that were working locally, informants that were working locally. These are Ghanaian informants that were supplying information to the CIA, and any kind of communications information that she was able to pull up as well. And when she returned to the United States, she was immediately polygraphed, and through the polygraph sessions, she was exposed. They found out that she was doing all of these things, and so they knew that because she gave up these informants, the consequences would be it could be very, very dire. It could be very, very severe, because Governments like Ghana's government at the time they wouldn't take kindly to it. Very similar to the Soviet Union and Russians. They don't take kindly to rats and informants, and they could have very easily executed all of those informants as soon as they found out that this was actually what was happening. So, because they now had learned that Scranage was doing all of these things against the CIA, they were like, okay, well, why don't we do our own campaign against Ghana? So now, backed by the CIA, because now they're supporting her, she decided to start her own little honeypot and trap Susudis. So what she does is she calls him and invites him to come to the United States with the promise of providing even more information. And as soon as Susudis gets to the US, he's immediately arrested and he's held captive. And the Ghanaian government immediately arrested all of the informants that they knew about. And one of them, supposedly, this isn't again for sure, but the belief is that one of those informants was immediately executed in the chaos of all of that situation when Susudis was arrested and they found out about it. And it's assumed that the CIA contacted the Ghanaian government to try to get some kind of leverage using Susudis, and then when they found out about it, they executed the informants. But then the rest of them were exchanged for Susudis, right? So it was kind of like a quid pro quo type of a situation, and they released Susudis in exchange for the rest of those informants that were captured by the Ghanaian government. Scranage herself was sentenced to 5 years in prison. Next up, we have John Vassall. 1952 was around this time that Vassall was active, and this was around the time that in the United Kingdom, being gay was illegal. In the Soviet Union, being gay was a death sentence. So this is the kind of like the era that this entire situation took place. And it all started with an orgy. When I read this was hilarious to me. And the way that it was phrased was literally that. It all started with an orgy. So it all started with an orgy that was set up by the KGB to blackmail Vassall. And they got him severely drunk, and, several people were involved. And obviously everything was documented. So they took pictures of everything, and then they used those pictures as leverage. And obviously he succumbed to it, and he started working for them. But eventually he actually embraced it because he was being paid very well by the KGB to do what he was doing and to provide all the intelligence that he was providing. And in 1956, Vassall joined the Admiralty, which is a pretty big deal in the UK, and he still continued to pass on intelligence to the KGB. Then somebody from the KGB side, so a senior KGB agent by the name of Anatoly Golitsyn, defected in 1961. So he essentially betrayed and left the KGB in 1961. And then he warned that there was a spy in the Admiralty, and immediately the suspicion fell on Vassall because his lifestyle that he was carrying on was way above his pay grade and the things that he was. So they were like, oh, you know what? I think this is the guy, or that's the presumption that happened. That it's like, where is he getting all this money from to afford this lifestyle that he had? And so they suspected that he was the one, and he was given an 18-year sentence. So obviously he was arrested, he was prosecuted, and he was given an 18-year sentence. But after 11 years, they released him. So this was the first story that I found that was not a male-female type of thing. It was the homosexual concept of, and I mean, this was also around an era where homosexuality was supposed to be supposedly a crime in the UK, and it was a death sentence in the KGB, but still the KGB used men to seduce this particular gentleman, and then they blackmailed him with it. So it's like, even though technically it's a death sentence, they still were able to, and it's not that surprising, but they still did it. They still used gay operatives to go after this guy, and it was pretty hellacious. The next story is the one of the Parlor Maid, and this one is actually pretty crazy. This is her. So her name is Katrina Long. Leung. I'm going to call her Katrina. Katrina was a double agent. And this is, I mean, it's gnarly. She was first married to Cam Leung in 1975. And this was like a normal, average vanilla wedding, so to speak. In 1980, she met somebody by the name of J.J. Smith, who was an FBI agent who recruited Leung to gather intel. And the way that this happened was Leung was essentially a part of some groups that were very vocal about the Republic of China, and that drew the attention of J.J. Smith. And then through that interaction, J.J. Smith found this one guy who ended up going to jail. I forget his name, but it's about to pop up in a little bit. J.J. Smith finds this guy that ends up going to jail, and he goes to Leung to gather some kind of dirt on this particular prisoner, and she gave it up immediately. And so J.J. Smith thinks that, okay, you know what, maybe this could be a useful asset, and so he recruits Leung to come in and serve as an informant and become an agent for the FBI. And then during the trip to China, Leung visits that prisoner, Hansen Huang, there you go, that's his name. She visits that prisoner, and then she convinces him to become an FBI informant. So J.J. Smith uses Leung to go to China, visit Hansen Huang, which was the original person that J.J. Smith found Leung through, and then Smith convinces Leung to go and convince Huang and flip him to become an FBI informant. And of course, that worked really well. And because that worked as well as it did, Smith gave her the nickname, the code name, the Parlor Maid. And for 20 years, she was an FBI asset. This is insane. This is a very, very long time. It's not a short period of time for somebody to be working as an FBI asset. So for 20 years, she was an FBI asset. And during that time, of course, she slept with J.J. Smith, even though she's married, and he was married too. So they're both married. And of course, as the world of sexpionage goes, there's a lot of sex involved. So they sleep together, and Smith falls in love with Leung. And so he was so impressed by her that he then encouraged her to become a double agent with the Ministry of State Security, which is part of Chinese government. So he was the one that pushed her to becoming a double agent. And of course, she succeeded very brilliantly. She had a keen talent for this, and she was very, very good at it. So she worked for the Reagan administration, the Clinton administration, both of the Bush administrations, and officially turned into a double agent sometime after 1986. The speculation is that because prior to this, in 1984 and 1985, she went through a couple of polygraph tests, and she passed those polygraph tests. And after that, the last one I think was 86, or yeah, maybe it was 85 and 86, something like that the polygraphs had taken place. And so the speculation is that because she passed those two polygraphs, it was sometime after 1986 that she officially turned into a double agent, where she started gathering intel from both sides. Smith was feeding her the bureau documents regularly, and she fed them to the MSS, and then vice versa, right? She would gather some kind of intelligence from MSS and from the Chinese government, and she would feed it back to the FBI. Then she was introduced to somebody by the name of Special Agent William Cleveland Jr., and of course, she slept with him too, and he was also married, and he also fell for her. Right, and he became another source of intelligence for Katrina that she would deliver back to the MSS. And then 3 years later, she was caught on tape giving classified intelligence to her MSS handler, but because of the fact that Smith was so infatuated with her, he vouched for her, and that case was ultimately dropped. So this is really the power that can take place when somebody is so entangled and so to speak, wrapped around somebody's pinky, right? So J.J. Smith was wrapped around the pinky of the Parlor Maid, of Katrina. And so he vouched for her. The case was dropped. But then in 2000, some more suspicious activity came up. And so the government became suspicious against Katrina once again. And finally, in 2003, she was arrested. But because the case was dropped because of prosecution misconduct. That's basically it. That's like all the information that we get. So we don't really know what that was. And she was released. and that's basically it. During her stint working for the FBI, she collected $1.7 million from the FBI in fees and an unknown amount from the MSS from China. But the rumor is that altogether she made over $20 million during her time that she was working as a double agent. And she basically got out of it scot-free, like hands clean, no arrest was made, she didn't serve any time, none of that stuff. So this was one of the kind of more intense stories, one of the crazier stories. Our next story is the Pakistani penetration story. I don't know if there's pun intended here, but penetration in this sense means that they penetrated the government, but there was, at some point, I think there was sex involved. I wasn't able to get images of the Brigadier Andrew Durkin. So this is the supposed image, and obviously this isn't the lady that was involved. This isn't the operative that was involved. It was just a nice image that came up as I was doing the image search and trying to figure something out. So Brigadier Andrew Durkin fell for a Pakistani local, and we didn't find the name. There was no name associated with this. And she was so good at being normal that it was never assumed that she was an operative. She didn't look like an operative. She didn't act like one. She didn't walk like one. She didn't talk like one. And because Andrew Durkin thought that she was a local, he just brought her along everywhere he went, to the outings, especially even with high-ranked officers of the UK government. And so her main intention really was to get into these locations where these people hung out. And eventually MI6 actually noticed her presence, and they dug up some intelligence about her that Durkin never actually even bothered to look for. And it turned out that she was an agent for the ISI, and especially trained to pick up intelligence. And she did it so well because Durkin didn't even believe that she could possibly be somebody that was working in intelligence. And she was never interested in Durkin himself. She just wanted to get to these locations where all these high-ranking officers hung out so that she could gather intelligence. And immediately, they dishonorably relieved Durkin of his position, and that's kind of it for the story here. There were some like random images that I saw that supposedly were the images of the girl, but there wasn't enough proof for me to pull those images and try to use those images in this situation. There wasn't anything that specifically said that they slept together, although that is more speculation that, that she slept with Durkin. But as we covered at the beginning of this video, sexpionage and just everything that goes on in this world doesn't necessarily have to equal having sex. It could just be the promise of sex, or the thought that yes, maybe you will get to have sex with this person, and so that enticing type of an offer, or that enticing thought process, that is enough in some cases to make people do the things that they do to either intentionally or unintentionally betray their governments. So unfortunately, that's all I found for this particular story. And now moving on to the Kim Jong II, Kim Jong II storyline. So this lady is Won Jong-hwa, and this was around 2001. And Won defected from North Korea, and she crosses the border and goes to South Korea. And immediately, as she got to South Korea, she was embraced by the South Korean government, paraded around the country to speak against communism, and they really just put her on a pedestal. And a lot of different intelligence officers actually invited her to their gatherings and, of course, their hotel rooms, and a big portion of the people who invited her were the South Korean militaries, who's who of the military. Basically, all the head honchos or all the high-ranking officers who were just, infatuated by this woman who defected against North Korea, came down and is telling all these stories and is speaking against communism, and it really is supporting the cause of the South Korean government. But she was a spy the entire time. So she came down with the intention of gathering intelligence for Kim Jong II. And she was ousted in 2008 and arrested and sentenced for 5 years. And during her trial, North Korea strongly, adamantly denied that she was their agent. So basically, they're like, we don't even know this chick. We don't want anything to do with her. And they even called her human scum, which is very befitting of something that you would think that North Korea would do, because, she betrayed the North Korean government and she stood against that regime, so on and so forth. So she didn't really have a home to go back to in North Korea. And she was actually arrested and sentenced for 5 years in South Korea. So this is the story of Won in the Kim Jong II era, which is, relatively recently. Like, a lot of these stories are from like the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. And this was recently in 2008. So pretty crazy. And next we have the Romeo King. So this is where the target is a female again. We haven't had very many stories where the target was female and the operative was male. I think this was the second one where the target was female, and this one's a little bit heartbreaking. It's kind of tough. So the mark here is Gabrielle Klein, and she worked at the American Embassy. And Frank Dietzel was the Romeo that was recruited to seduce her. Frank was chosen specifically to seduce Klein because he resembled her past lover. So everything from the way that he looked to his mannerisms, I think the trade that he said that he did, like his actual job, his front was, he does the same work that his ex-lover did. So like for a lot of different reasons, Gabrielle was immediately infatuated with Frank because he just resembled her ex-boyfriend or her ex-fiance, something like that. This was a long con. So they, after 3 months of meeting each other, they got engaged. And Frank was married already. At that time, he was actually already married, but he got engaged with Gabrielle to kind of lure her in even further. They were engaged for 7 years. So this is it's a long con to pull on this one person. And obviously during that entire time, he was just giving her everything that she wanted to hear. He was telling her everything she wanted to know. And in exchange, she was feeding him documents for all that time. So he would literally tell her that he loved her and all the things that you would want to hear when you're infatuated with somebody, when you're in love with somebody. You want to hear that they love you back and they're returning all those feelings to you. And he did exactly all of those things. And in exchange, because she thought that she was actually in love with this person and this is like the love of her life, reincarnated, so on and so forth, she fed him all the documents that he wanted from the American Embassy. And after 7 years of being engaged, she finally called it off. But it was more so because their visits were only like once or twice a month. Like they weren't frequent visits. She still had no idea what was actually going on. And after being broken up, 7 years after they were broken up, she found out that Frank was actually an operative that was working to get information from her. And it was mainly because of the fact that when they arrested her, they were using Frank as a piece of evidence to hold against her and say that, you've been committing espionage and you've been doing all these things that you shouldn't be doing. And so when she was arrested, he was actually rewarded for his con and the job that he did and how well he did against her. And it was something that was obviously devastating. So just based on some of the records and some of the stories, she was obviously devastated. Because imagine if somebody makes you believe that they are actually in love with you, you get engaged with them, you've been with them for 7 years, and you get arrested for doing what you did, and the person that did that to you is actually rewarded from their government because they did such a great job of conning you. They did such a great job of fooling you. And I think this image right here, the actual picture, is from an interview that they did with her many years later, where she was just telling this story, and it was kind of like a biopic, like a biography type of a piece, a documentary piece, where they just were trying to find stories like this of people that fell for honeypots and honey traps and Romeos and cons and things like that in the world of espionage. Our next story is about Adolf Hitler, none other than the man himself. And Hitler was the mark, right? Oh, this is, again, some of these stories are just crazy. So the operative in this particular case is Martha Dodd, and she was an American ambassador. Her father was an American ambassador. She was around the world of intelligence pretty much all of her childhood and all of her life. And as she grew up, she was just kind of very infatuated with the Nazis, and she spied on the Nazis for Stalin. And there was something about it that she just spent a lot of time around those circles, the social circles for the Nazi militia and their government and everything that they did. And she slept her way to the top, essentially. She would just hook up with the different officers in the Nazi military. And one of the notable officers was Rudolf Diels, or Dales, I don't know how you pronounce that, Diels maybe, which was the leader of the Gestapo. And she ultimately slept with Hitler's aide, so it was like right hand, his personal assistant kind of a thing. And the aide was trying to convince Hitler to find an American woman like Dodd because they're super exciting and they're really good for you and so on and so forth. And so finally, the one time that she ends up meeting Hitler, she kind of comes to the conclusion that he's not really very exciting. He seemed very reserved and very self-conscious, and it just wasn't very exciting. And so it was at that dinner that Dodd lost her fascination with the Nazis, and she no longer really was interested in them. And so she was looking for a new North Star, so to speak, a new thing to believe in. And she met somebody by the name of Boris Vinogradov, which was a Russian diplomat. And through her relationship with him, she fell in love with the concept of communism. And Boris convinced her to become a spy. So she continued to spy on the Nazis, but now she was doing it for the Russian government and for the KGB. And she was very successful. She was a notable operative in the eyes of a lot of people, including Stalin. Like, Stalin actually knew who she was. And it got to the point that she had to finally move back to the United States. But because in America, they're pretty against the communist belief system, so her anti-American views very, very quickly grew old, and she was forced to flee the country. And she ended up nation hopping, is what the article was saying, until she finally died in 1990. And finally, we have the Bumbling Spy. This is kind of a funny story. So this is the guy. His name is Richard Miller. And by all accounts, he was known to be a bad FBI agent. He did a lot of things wrong. So he stole candy from the local 7-Eleven as an FBI agent, by the way. He stole candy from the local 7-Eleven. He skipped work to read comic books. He would misplace or lose his gun regularly. And just a lot of things that you wouldn't expect an FBI agent to do. You expect them to be super sharp, and you want them to be intelligent and professional and all these things. And he was doing all these things that was just very anti-FBI agent. So he was exactly the kind of target that the Svetlana Ogorodnikov was looking for. Svetlana, we'll just call her Svetlana. So she was looking for a mark, right? And so she finds this guy. At the time, he's broke. He's unhappily married. He's unhappily working. He doesn't like his job. He doesn't like what he's doing. And so he really was genuinely the perfect mark for somebody to target. So Svetlana met this particular gentleman in 1984. And for the first few months, they were literally just on a sex bender. And there was nothing exciting, or they didn't do really much other than that. How about that? And Miller, if in his perspective, he's literally in heaven, right? He finds this lady and they have this amazing time and he has this amazing affair. And he said that for $50,000 in cash, and at the time I would say that that's probably around $100,000, $200,000 in current dollars, and $15,000 in gold, he would give her anything that she wanted. And she agreed. She was like, yeah, sure, that sounds great. But she never paid him. And, from all of the documents, because when he ultimately was arrested, they found a lot of documents that he was hoarding that he had taken from the FBI. But finally, when they went through to try to figure out all the damages, they really found out that he only gave up a few of those documents. He didn't give up everything. So he didn't give up all the documents that she was requesting. And it turned out that Svetlana wasn't even an actual Soviet spy. She was just a scam artist that was just looking for a mark to try to blackmail and try to get something out of. And Miller ultimately testified that he also knew about her intentions, right? So this is where he's trying to save his own butt. And he's like, yeah, he knew about her intentions, and he was just trying to flip her for the benefit of the FBI and of the United States. But nobody believed him because he wasn't smart enough. So this is where like his attorney came out and he's like, yeah, we just didn't think that was actually the case. So nobody actually believed him. So, but because of what they did, because of the fact that they thought that Svetlana was actually a Soviet spy, and they thought that he had actually given up, Miller had actually given up a lot of documents and a lot of intelligence, this actually turned to a real spy scandal. And this ended up becoming a situation between the two countries because these two idiots, for lack of a better word, made all of these mistakes, and the countries now trying to do damage control actually got into a discourse with each other, and it actually turned into a real situation because of two people that really had no business even trying to do any of this stuff. They had no idea what they were doing. They were both playing spies when in fact neither of them actually knew what the hell they were doing. So I thought that this is actually a pretty funny story. Now, the perfect target ultimately needs to have some kind of a vice, some kind of a weakness. And this is always what I think about. It's the scene from Ocean's 11 that they're trying to get a key card to get into like a restricted area in the hotel. And so they're saying, yeah, there's two guards that are usually on duty, and one of them is lonely. And so the lonely security guard going to the strip club, and of course, the crew from Ocean's 11 finds the stripper that he's really into. They pay off the stripper, and she goes, and while she's giving him a lap dance, she swipes his guard card, and they go and they make a duplicate of the guard card, and she gives the guard card back to the guy, and he's none the wiser. He didn't even know that it happened, and he was taken advantage of, and he was lonely. He was the lonely security guard, and he just wanted to blow off some steam, and he ended up being the perfect mark in this particular story. And this is not too far-fetched. This is not out of the ordinary for something like this to happen. I can't imagine that this wouldn't happen more frequently, because there are just so many men who have a weakness for beautiful women, and if you're lonely, then you get caught up. You got to be exploitable, right? So it goes back to the vices. So what is it about you that makes you easy? What is it about you that makes you exploitable? And if you want to be protected against these types of things, like if you're looking at it from the perspective of how can I protect myself against something like this potentially happening to me, because there's a likelihood that if you're following this channel, you're trying to go into cybersecurity, or you're already in cybersecurity. Or if you're watching this video, there's something about this that drew you to it, that for whatever reason, you're either very fascinated in it or you're trying to protect against it. And so, are you exploitable? That would be the question. Is there something about you that makes you an easy target, that makes you an easy mark? And if there is, that's something that you should be aware of. That's something that you should check for. You know what I mean? And if somebody's trying to exploit that specific character trait about you, then you should definitely have your guard up and red flags should go up and so on and so forth. Do you have any skeletons in the closet, right? Does the person have any skeletons in the closet that can be leveraged? If we refer back to the last few stories, if there are no skeletons in the closet, they'll take pictures of you and they'll create those skeletons in the closet, and then they'll use that information against you. So you may not have, a vice, or you probably, the vice might be there, and that's what got you into that trouble situation, but you may not necessarily have anything on record or some kind of a paper trail that they can exploit. So what they're going to do is they're going to take advantage of some kind of a weakness. They'll get you in a room with this beautiful woman, especially if you're a married guy who's in power and you're a part of parliament, or you're like some kind of ambassador or something like that. When that person gets caught cheating, that's a really big scandal. And there's been a lot of stories that the person ended up killing themselves because they were blackmailed and they didn't want the information to get out and they didn't want to betray their country. So they said that the easiest way that it would be is for me to kill myself, and they killed themselves. And there's a lot of stories like that. Unfortunately, it's just there wasn't enough details to be able to cover it. But if you go Google this information, like, you will find so many stories like that of the person that they were exploited. They got pictures of them. They got some kind of evidence to hold against them. And the offer was, you either work for us or we're going to put you on blast. We're going to reveal this information about you. And instead of doing either of those things, the person just killed themselves. So if you don't have skeletons in your closet, it's not out of the ordinary for them to create those skeletons and place those skeletons in the closet. And now we finally get to my story. So the mark in this particular situation is Hank Hackerson. This was back in 2021. My weaknesses and vices at the time were that I was smoking weed every single day, multiple times a day. I was pretty much high all day. When the evening would come around, I would be taking 3-4 shots of whiskey. So weed and alcohol would make my willpower low. They would make my resolve low. My character was weak at the time. And to top it off, I was also lonely. I didn't have a girlfriend. I was single for a really long time. I was dealing with a lot of stuff really just a lot of demons. And as a person, I was very weak. As a person, my character was really weak. So this made me the perfect mark, right? So somebody who's under the influence of some kind of substance all the time, they're lonely, and now they just want a little bit of affection or love in their life. That's the perfect mark. And so what happened was my femme fatale in my situation was some girl, quote unquote, some girl that I matched with on Hinge. And the conversation started out innocent enough, and you get to know each other, and you're having these great conversations, so on and so forth, exchange some pictures, and I see the pictures, and I'm like, man, she's beautiful. But the red flag initially was, hey, let's do some video chats. No, I can't, I'm busy, whatever. But because I was high and drunk all the time, and I was already lonely, I was like, oh, okay, fine, I just bought the excuses, right? It's an immediate red flag when somebody says, no, I don't want to video chat with you, or I don't want to meet you, especially if you've been chatting for weeks, right? It's like, it's one of these things that should make you suspicious. But because I had a weak character, and this is very important to understand, right? I'm no longer drunk or addicted to, I've been sober for a very long time now because of what happened to me, and I'll show you exactly the rest of the story. But because I had that weak character, I didn't have the resolve and the willpower to say, hey, you know what, this seems kind of fishy. If you're not down to, at least do some kind of a video chat or whatever. I understand if you feel shy about meeting up in person for whatever BS reason. But if you're not going to do a video chat with me, then I'm done, right? So this was my femme fatale, and for weeks this went on. And then ultimately, the conversation came up to, hey, do you do trading? Are you into investments? And I was like, yeah, of course I am. And then we got into this whole conversation of day trading cryptocurrency. And the application that was recommended was a real application. So there's something called MetaTrader, and that's a real application for day trading. And it's been downloaded by millions of people. There's multiple versions of it. There's a lot of reviews about it. So this is not a shady application inherently. But the shady part came when I was referred to a broker dealer to house my money so that I can go ahead and make those trades. And I didn't look into the broker dealer. I did a lot of due diligence behind the trading application, and I was like, oh, this seems legit. Okay, no problem. And so I didn't look into the broker dealer. And because I didn't look into the broker dealer, that was my big mistake in this whole thing. And it started out small. It always started out small. You go with a couple of $100, they give you some trading advice, you make the trade and you make some money. And it's like, hey, so why don't you deposit some more money? Because, if you had more money to trade with, you would make even more money. And I'm like, okay, well, yeah, that totally makes sense. And I put in more money. And the trades were successful again, and I made more money. And I was like, okay, wow, this is great. This is amazing. Wow, I can't believe that this beautiful girl is helping me make all this money. And why don't you add some more money? Why don't you add some more money? And ultimately, I lost $22,000 approximately from that whole process. After weeks and months of doing this incremental stuff and putting more and more chunks of money, I lost. And at that time, $22,000 was pretty much all that I had. Like after this whole thing happened, I was trying to figure out how to pay rent. And I had no income at the time. I was living off of my savings. There was a lot of bad stuff that happened after this, and I fell into a much deeper hole and depression. And I used, I smoked more weed and drank more alcohol. I was in like a really bad situation until finally I was like, you know what? I need to dig myself out of this hole, right? So it was a long con that was done against me. This whole process took months, I think maybe 3 or 4 months, 5 months maybe. And the method that they used was the day trading scheme through cryptocurrency, which was funneled through an application that was legitimate. The trading application was legitimate, but the brokerage that was attached to it was the shady brokerage. And when I asked for my money back, they didn't give me my money back. And I found out that it was in a different country, and to even try to do some kind of an investigation, I would need to know somebody that is an authority, some kind of police in that country to be able to find investigators. And it was just so much that I just, I broke down, I gave up. It was like a really, really dark period of my life. But the result of that was I got into cybersecurity. It was one of those triggers that I was like, you know what, this is never going to happen to me again. And I need to find out exactly what just happened to me. And it was a very natural move for me to actually get into cybersecurity, information security, learn about social engineering, and learn about how people get hacked and what all the different things are. And I ultimately became an ethical hacker. And when I found out that the weakest link in the chain of cybersecurity is the human being, it's not so much the machines or the infrastructure or the logic or the technical stuff. That's not really the weak stuff. The weakest part is the human being. So if you can socially engineer the human being, if you can manipulate the human being, then you have your way in, because we are the weakest link in the cybersecurity chain. And yeah, that's pretty much my story. I have recovered most of that money through just, earning and saving and things like that. But the trauma was something that was really, really tough to get over. And it was a very, very difficult situation. And I hope it never happens to anybody. I think if you're watching this, you're definitely smarter than I was, and you probably haven't been taken advantage of. And I hope you never do. But if you are dealing with something like that, now you know what's going on. And leave your story in the comments. I would love to hear if anything like that has happened to you, or if you're going through something like that and you have doubts, and we can kind of chat back and forth, and I can give you my perspective on it. But if it seems too good to be true, it probably is. That's like the big thing that I'll give you. And that's literally the theme for all of these people. Like, if it seems too good to be true, it probably is, right? If it seems too good to be true, Eric Swalwell, it probably is. If it seems too good to be true, it probably is. Like, all of these things have that as the through line, right? The weakness for women, the loneliness part, all of these things. That's the common denominator in all of these stories, where there was something that I'm sure went, that, you know, inside the mind of this person. There was some kind of red flag that went off, but everything else just was too convenient, and it was too nice, and they have a weakness for women, and all of these types of things happen, and then you get taken advantage of. That's the main reason why sexpionage even works. When you look at a woman like this and you're like, damn, this lady is gorgeous, and she's giving me the time of day, she's giving me attention, and she's all some kind of stuff, then you're like, okay, well, yeah, sure, I'll talk to you. Yeah, sure, I'll tell you about whatever. Yeah, sure, this is, I don't like my boss, or I don't like what's going on. And you don't know that she's registering all of this information. You don't know that she's using all this information. And I mean, in the case of Aliia Roza, more power to her, because she defected against her commanding officer, I guess, and fell in love with her actual target and didn't really take advantage of her target. I mean, they could call her a traitor from the perspective. It just depends on the perspective, right? So on that side, they're calling her a traitor. On our side, especially if you're the one that's the mark, you're like, oh man, thank God that I didn't, this person didn't take advantage of me, right? But, too good to be true. Like, it just goes, like, all of these things, just there's so many things about it that are just red flags, and you're like, man, I can't believe this happened. And you look at a woman like this. Jennifer Lawrence is a beautiful woman, and so if she came and seduced you, I don't know if I'd be able to stand against it. You know what I mean? So that's pretty much it. That is our entire video for the history of sexpionage. I know I didn't give you everything about sexpionage, because honestly, there's so much information out there, and there are so many things that could possibly have taken place, and there's a lot of stuff that you can definitely go read into and Google and just go watch the movies and these different type of things. But this was something that was very, very fascinating to me, and I was like, okay, well, we have a channel about cybersecurity, we have a channel about hacking, so why not do a quick little video about sexpionage, social engineering, espionage, the Femme Fatale story, and just a few key stories of the things that actually happened, and my transparency as well, just to share with you my story of what happened to me and why I got into cybersecurity. So I hope you got some kind of value from it. I hope you were entertained, or I hope you learned some things. Would love to hear from you in the comment section if you have something that you want to share, because I think it's always cool to be able to talk about stuff like this and kind of learn from each other's experiences. So if you have anything like that, I would love to hear from you. And apart from that, like, subscribe, turn on the notification bell, drop a comment, share this with your friends, share this with your colleagues, so on and so forth. Make sure that you have your guards up when you get approached by a super gorgeous woman that wants to get something from you. And yeah, that is pretty much it. It's your boy Hank Hackerson at Hank Hacks Hackers, your favorite network and system attacker / protector. If no one else loves you, Hank loves you. Love, peace, and chicken grease. And I will see you in the next video. Later.